Hello friends, so for today's video I'm gonna add another one to my About Me playlist. So this is like a memoir thing, and I'm gonna be talking about reading. Reading was, I would say, my first love in the world, and it was the dominant thing that I was doing for most of my childhood. I already uploaded a video about music, but I only really picked up music as a teenager. Whereas reading for me began as early as I can remember. I think I might have been 3 or 4 years old when I started reading. Maybe earlier, I don't know. But I have fond memories of spending hours and hours and hours just reading and reading. And where do we start? Both of my parents are readers, which I am very grateful for, and they encouraged my love of reading in a very matter-of-fact way. They didn't make a huge deal out of it. They didn't pressure me to do it. They both happened to be people who read, and there were always books in my house. And when I first started reading, I was just hooked, man, and I just kept going. I remember there were many days where I would be reading into the night. I would have this little desk lamp that I would put on the floor next to my bed, my mattress, and I would be reading until I fell asleep. And when I would wake up, the first thing in the morning I would do is continue reading. And that was normal for me. I didn't think of it as something special or important or significant in any way. It was just my life. My life was books, and a little bit later it was also video games and TV. I didn't spend a lot of time hanging out with friends as a child, and I'm talking about kind of before school, like in kindergarten ish and whatnot, school holidays and stuff. I didn't go out much. My siblings, so I have 4 siblings, but they're all significantly older than me. My youngest elder brother, so all my siblings are older. The older sibling, who is the closest to me in terms of age, is 7 years older than me. So, by the time I was about 7 or 8, he was already 14 or 15, and we just, we didn't have much in common apart from video games, which we would sometimes play together. But it was in a strange way. While I was part of a large family, I do feel like I have a bit of the experience of an only child, because I didn't have a fellow kid within a couple of years age difference of me, and so I spent all my time reading. Right? What did I read? I was very into Charlie Brown's Cyclopedia, which so my mom's a big Snoopy fan, and there was this encyclopedia box set that my parents got for me, and it had all of these. It had stuff about space and stars and rocket ships. It had stuff about the cells in the body, the bones, the nerves. It had stuff about plants, dinosaurs, magnets, electricity, and again, that was just very normal for me to learn about the world and to learn about stuff that was happening. I think I might have been about 11 or 12, maybe younger, or maybe even like 9. I think I might have been 9 or 10 when I read a book called When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr. And it's a memoir of a Jewish girl and her family who left Germany during the Nazi era. And nothing, they managed to escape the Holocaust, I believe. They might have had like a relative or someone who was left behind, but it wasn't a gruesome story, but it was a pretty intense and harrowing story, and yet it had that kind of childlike wonder of a woman's childhood, and I remember being very moved by that. I remember reading The Dark Is Rising by Susan Cooper, which was kind of a fantasy story, but set in present day ish, and there's like magical objects, and I can't remember the specifics of the plot anymore. I remember reading his Dark Materials trilogy, Lyra and her Daemon. I remember reading the Harry Potter books. I didn't actually like the first Harry Potter book I read was the second one, not the first one, and I didn't really like it the first time around. I guess I feel like if you read the second book first and you haven't read the first one, there's a bunch of things that the book kind of takes for granted that you would know from the first book, and I didn't really enjoy it. But then I read the first book. The first book is very well put together, and I read the second and third book, and I think like the last four books or so, I would buy them the day the books came out, and I would read them in one sitting. I had a ability to just start reading and not stop. And I don't know if this is my ADHD, or if it's, I don't know if it's something that I developed because I just love books so much. I don't know if it's my innate personality. At some point I discovered Calvin and Hobbes comics, and I devoured all of them that I could find. I related to Calvin a lot, that sense of mischief and playfulness, and trying to get one up on situations, and then seeing the absurdity of things. I remember reading, what else? I read a lot of stuff. I wish I had a record of all of the things I read. I would go to the library very often, and my mom would bring me. I would use my library card, her library card. I think one of my siblings one of their library cards. So I would borrow like 8 to 12 books at a time from the library, and I would carry all of them. And we would go to, so in Singapore, we would go to usually Tampines Library, sometimes Marine Parade Library, mostly those two, and occasionally Bedok maybe. And I would carry out like 8 books, and I would start reading the book on the bus home, or if we would go to like McDonald's or Burger King or somewhere for dinner, I would be reading a book while my mom was ordering food. I was just reading all the time, and it was so exciting for me, so novel, so much beauty, and every book felt like a love letter, right, from the author to me. And I was just so happy to always be reading. I would be, when I started going to school, at primary school, I would often have a book or two in my bag that I would read. I would read in the mornings before school starts. I don't think I read during recess. Sometimes I did, maybe later on. But I would read under my desk when class was boring. I would just read and read and read. What did I read? I was reading about ancient civilizations. I was reading about Egyptian mythology, Roman mythology. When I was about 10, 11, I got into Singapore's gifted education program. And they had like this reading list that they would suggest. And from that reading list, I found a bunch of good stuff. I read Hatchet. Which is about a guy, a boy who kind of like a castaway type situation, like this boy on a plane, like a small prop plane with him and one other guy, and the plane crashes, and he has to survive with his hatchet, right? And he does. And The Chocolate War by Robert Cormier, that's a dark book, man, and it's very bleak. I read a whole bunch of Robert Cormier books, and it devastated me. It was just this really dark, really bleak stories. It was kind of like so The Chocolate War is kind of like Mean Girls set in a Catholic boys' school, I think, but it's like politics, and it's no holds barred, man. There's no they go into some dark shit. And I think Robert Cormier died in something like 2003 or 4 or 5, and I felt something about that. Like, the author was still alive when I had started reading the books, and he died somewhere in between. When I was in Sec 1, I remember that was at 13, I read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. I read it because my friends were interested in the movies, and I watched the third movie without watching the first two. But I could tell that it was an interesting story, and so I read the books, and I kind of liked them, I think. What else? What are my favorite books from those days? I read a lot of Enid Blyton, who, it's Famous Five, the Five Find Outers, detective stories, Mallory Towers, just all of these stories of kind of independent kids, kind of, resisting authority, figuring stuff out, solving mysteries, resolving problems. And I guess I really took all of that stuff to heart. I really took it for granted that any kid could be doing that, right? Could be figuring stuff out, solving problems. And yeah, I remember when I was in junior college, even I was still reading the whole time. Even when I was in secondary school, I hit puberty. I started watching anime and MTV, and I got interested in girls and computer games, and I wanted to play in a band. But even through all of those things, I'm pretty sure that I was always reading something. I would go to I can never go to a library and not end up being curious about something and picking it up and wanting to bring it home and read it. I remember when I was in junior college, I was reading Team of Rivals by Doris Goodwin Kieran, because Obama recommended it, and it's a book about Abraham Lincoln and his team of rivals, and I remember being very moved by that. And I was reading that during a time where I wasn't doing very well in school, but I didn't care. And looking back, I'm so impressed. I mean, should I be impressed? I don't know. It didn't feel like something that was up to me. I was trying to do well in school. I was making an effort, but that effort seemed constrained by something, and that something seemed to be like, now with the benefit of hindsight, it feels tempting to say that it's a more profound wisdom inside of me that had some pig-headedness or stubbornness about what's really important in life, and for me it was reading. I remember once I was in class and I was reading a book about like politics, about the Greater East Asian Hemisphere, something like that, by Kishore Mahbubani. And I remember my GP tutor, my general paper tutor, she noticed that I was reading under the desk, and she came to me and she grabbed the book from me, kind of expecting it to be like a comic or something, frivolous, and she saw what it was, and she was kind of startled, like she didn't know what to say. She was like, aha, and then she was like, then I think she said, you better promise me that you're going to get an A for general paper, because you're reading all of these advanced things. And at that time, I don't think I was trying to read advanced things. I think I was just reading whatever I was curious about. I'm very glad that has always been a thing for me. I have heard from friends now as an adult. I've heard from people who kind of feel some kind of guilt about their books, or they feel pressured or obligated to read books that are smart, or to read books that are current, or fashionable, or whatever. I inherited a little bit of that, but I was like in my 20s by the time I started getting even any sense from anybody else that I should maybe feel some guilt or some self-consciousness about what I'm reading, right? When I was 20, I went to serve in the Singapore Armed Forces, which Singaporean men have to do their national service, either in the army or police or civil defense. And I was determined to make up for my lost education. I wanted to be, a polymath. I wanted to be an autodidact. Right? Somebody said, not knowing how to pronounce words is a sign that you're a reader, right? Like you've read all these words that are in your head, but you don't use them, and so you don't know what they are. Autodidact. A person who self-taught, who reads and learns from books, right? And so I decided to pick up books about, philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, what else? History of science. I wanted to read about famous kind of thinkers. I was reading Bertrand Russell and Benjamin Franklin and Carl Sagan, a biography of him. What else? I read Antifragile at some point, Black Swan. Can't remember who introduced that to me, but I wanted to read it. And somewhere in one of the books, I think Taylor mentions Lost Illusions by Balzac, I think. And then I picked that up and I read that and I really liked it. In more recent times, I've read, in around 2015, I read Ender's Game and all of the sequels. I was pretty late to that. I read The Fountainhead, I think, around 2014 because my ex-boss mentioned that he liked it. Yeah, it's almost like a bit of a love language kind of thing. Like when somebody else tells me that there's some book that they like that meant a lot to them, I would read it. During national service, I borrowed a copy of someone else's Norwegian Wood by Murakami, and I read all of that. Um, but even so, if you're asking me kind of like for book recommendations, I don't really know. I read Lewis Thomas's Lives of a Cell. That was one of the books I bought from the library book sale. So when I was in the military, I didn't have a lot of money. I stopped taking money from my parents, and so I was, uh, kind of living very skint. Like I didn't have much cash, and even so, once a year there's this thing called the National Library Book Sale where they sell books that are no longer going to be on the library shelves. So they are like I mean, they're still in readable condition, but they're just kind of decommissioning them, I guess. And it would be like English books would be like $2 per book. So I would bring my army duffel bag, this big motherfucker of a bag, and I would fill it up with everything. Like I'd fill it up with like 70 books and spend like 140 Sing dollars, which was, like all of the money I had at the time. And I'm glad that I did. I'm grateful that I did because, partially because of what I learned at the time, but also, it's like one of those things where you make a decision and that decision subsequently kind of becomes a part of your narrative and it informs you. Like, I am the guy who spent really all of his money on books. Like, that's the thing that I did. When I was about 10 or 11, at some point my mom and I were in a temple. So my mom would bring me to the temple, and there was like a book sale at the temple, and I saw this thick copy of the Mahabharata, and I wanted it. I'm like 10, right? It's a book's this big, and I was small at the time, right? And yeah, it was like a $50 book or something, but my mom asked my dad for permission if I could buy the book, and my parents always said yes to me spending money on books. Like that was one thing that they never said no to, and yeah, I bought it, read the whole thing, and I think I'm due for a reread. But I remember sitting down reading the whole Mahabharata. I read the Bible at some point. I don't remember where I got it. I don't remember if I read all of it, but I read it. I read about Nebuchadnezzar and all those Jacob and Joshua and whatnot. Sometimes Christian friends are surprised that I am familiar with the Bible because I read it. I read everything. What else? Lives of a Cell by Lewis Thomas. George Orwell, Animal Farm. Read that in Sec 1, I think, and I was really moved by it. Wrinkle in Time, that was pretty good. What else? Just so I got into marketing. I have a video about that, and I was fascinated. At some point I was curious about getting into advertising. Because I read so much and I've always been reading, I'm very familiar with language, with English, the ebbs and flows of the language. I have a sensitivity to phrases, words, paragraphs, sentences, commas, semicolons, em dashes, whatever. Like just the raw amount of books that I've read. I think in books, I think in words, in sentences, and it wasn't until quite a bit later. I think one of my friends, Ming, he wrote a blog post, I think, on his live journal, which said something like, there are two kinds of kids, and there are the kids who kind of learn the language of the novel, and the kids who learn the language of the playground, where you interface with other kids, and you kind of have this I'm okay, you're okay, back and forth that's very social and person to person, face to face kind of interactions. Whereas the novelist and the reader, they have this much more dialogue based writing. Like it's just you think in paragraphs, right? Someone asks you a question, and instead of kind of answering it off the cuff, you assemble your argument, or you lay out the landscape. You paint a portrait with your words, and that is something that you can kind of get a little bit bullied for, or like not necessarily like outright bullying, but I do think it differentiates you from others. And I was always moderately charismatic. I'm tall and brown, and so I always had to be talking with people. So it's not, I was never like a total recluse, bookish nerd who couldn't talk to people. Like, people would always put me on the spot and I would have to talk. But my first love was always reading and writing. It's interesting that it didn't occur to me that I could be a writer of books until much later in life. I loved books very much, and I thought of them as something almost sacred and precious and valuable. But it didn't occur to me that I could be a writer of books. I guess because I didn't personally know any writers, novelists, blah blah blah, and so I figured I would be working in something kind of languagey, like law, journalism, marketing, advertising, something like that. And I guess you could say I did in the end, right? I spent 5.5 years as a software marketing guy, a content guy, a writer, right? I wrote for a living, and now I sell my writing in ebooks, and I tweet a lot. And even, as I mentioned somewhere else, I even think of these YouTube videos. They are very, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, but I feel like I speak like a writer, if that makes sense. Like, I'm thinking, like, even when I make these such long videos, people are like, why are you making such long videos? And I'm like, because my thoughts are very long. I'm not trying to be, verbose. But I feel like to get anywhere interesting, I need a lot of space. And I can subsequently then maybe edit that down into something more compressed, but that requires effort and time, and I will do that eventually, but I kind of want to get all this stuff out of my system. Reading books, love books. There's a quote by Carl Sagan, I think, that says something like, "What a marvelous, splendid thing a book is. It's on a piece of dead tree, right? Organic matter. There's ink, that's squiggles of symbols, and we read these symbols, we interpret these symbols to mean words that have meaning, that we hallucinate meaning, and we by reading ordered symbols on a page, right, on a piece of wood, on a piece of tree, right, you get to imagine what someone else was thinking maybe 1,000, 2,000 years ago, right? That there is a magic in that. There's that transmission of information, of ideas, of communication. The fact that you can communicate with someone else from 2,000 years ago and 2,000 years in the future, right? I think I was indoctrinated by books very early on to believe that such communication is possible, and it's good, and it's valuable. And so I've always been thinking in these big picture terms, and not in a posturing way, but that's just the way I am, the way I think, the way I see the world is, in a literary sense. One of my analogies that I use is that I think of libraries, which are one of the few things that humanity has gotten right as a species in terms of like public resources and so on. Libraries are like lighthouses to the consciousness of humanity, lighthouses of human consciousness, right? They are cathedrals of human consciousness. They are precious. And these days, books are cheap, but there was a time where each book was made, handwritten and bound, and it was such a valuable thing, right? And these days you can get books for less than $1 here and there, sometimes from secondhand stores and stuff. But it's still thought made legible, which is crazy. We really take this shit for granted, and we really, if I had a religion, it would be books. You know what I mean? Either books or frames. Frames. I'm having fun now, kind of alluding to something. In only a few people who've watched all of my videos will get the frames. It's not for everyone, but yeah, either frames, a question mark, or books, right? And every religion has like a holy text, and the most upsetting thing about that to me is that lots of people have a holy text and they don't read it. Oh my god, it's so... Why do you not read? It's oh my god. I guess I got lucky. I got lucky, and I picked up reading very early on, and I made it a part of my life very early on. And I just take it for granted that books are precious and beautiful and powerful and amazing. And I think a couple of years ago I said something like, if I ever write a book that some kid says helped them, I'm done. I'm like, that's my life complete. Because when I was a kid, I read books that meant a lot to me, and if I can write a book in turn that some other kid says meant a lot to him, I'm done. You know, I've completed the cycle, and everything else after that is victory laps, right? And it's kind of happened already. So, but it's not a paper book, but sure, it's writing, right? I've been tweeting, and I assembled a bunch of my tweets into an ebook that I called Friendly Ambitious Nerd, and people have messaged me to say that the book meant a lot to them, and that is, I cannot express how profoundly reassuring, nourishing, wholesome that is. Like, just to feel like the cycle is complete, because I do feel like, and just the world is so full of bullshit at so many levels, right? So many people arguing and misunderstanding each other and refusing to listen to each other and refusing to have dialogues or conversations, and they're just trying to win stuff. And amidst that day-to-day chaos, there is that's like the surface of the sea, and that's like crazy. But if you go deeper and deeper and deeper, there is this much older, longer conversation happening over the centuries, right? Across epochs. People in different political circumstances, entirely different worlds, right? Different from the time before nation states, and the time of empires, and time of kings, and all of these things are changing, and writers have been writing for readers for all of time, and I was sometimes no, I don't want to go there. I had a thought that I'm not going to share about. It's kind of a adjacent thought, but I mean, the conclusion of that thought was going to be that books are my first love. If nothing else, like, if I don't know anything else, I know that I love books, and I know that when I see a child reading, I feel that the world's going to be okay. It's not. I mean, it's not, maybe not entirely okay, but as long as there are still kids that are reading, I feel like there's still hope in the world. And maybe that's a self-serving view, but I am proud to be a part of the legacy of nerds, and I will continue to do book review videos because I love books. I love reading. I love knowing other people's minds, and I love trying to understand things, and I love trying to learn and figure stuff out, and see things from a different point of view. And I encourage people to read, but I don't want to be pushy about it. I think one of the stupidest things that people do, or the most foolish things that people do, is they make a big deal out of it. Like you're supposed to be reading. Why aren't you reading? It should be pleasurable. It should be something you want to do. If you don't want to do it, that means you want to do something else maybe, and go and do that. You don't need to feel bad. Like, there's so much shit to feel bad about. You should never feel bad about your books. Your books are your friends. They're there for you. They will wait for you. There's no pressure. There's no compulsion. It's just when you feel like reading, you pick up a book and you read, and you become a man or woman out of time, a person out of time. You're no longer in the world around you. You are now in cyberspace, effectively, right? In idea space, in the realm of hallucinations, and the parliament of hallucinations, right? That have been lovingly, painstakingly put together by others. And I am very happy and proud to be a reader. I look forward to all of the books that I haven't read yet that I'm gonna be reading, and I'm gonna read until I die, man. And I'm blessed, right? And that's just my love letter to reading. Let me know what you like to read, what your experiences have been, what has your relationship been like. I'd love to read it. Done.